So in Wayfinder, the characters you play are the Wayfinders. At the very beginning, you start by choosing either Wingrave, a tank/melee brawler, Niss, a rogue, or Silo, a range/grenade specialist. Ultimately, you will unlock 7 total characters and be able to swap between them as much as you like. Now, each of the abilities the Wayfinders have do support a specific playstyle, but you can use any weapon with any character, you can stack pretty much any stat you want, and make something that feels good to you. But with that said, I'm going to be talking about them in this video based on the fantasy that they present. This is both because I don't want to cover every single possibility here, and also Wayfinders in early access, this is subject to change. They might rework a character, add new characters, or add heroic versions which are super powered, but not covered in this video as they're a bit out of scope and kind of limited currently. So, if Wayfinder gets some major updates and I come back to the game, there's a good chance I'll make another video, and the best way to see that is to get subscribed. But for now, let's get into the 7 characters that you can play currently. And so let's start with Wingrave, who is actually my first choice starting the game. I picked him because usually I play a mage or a ranged DPS, and I just wanted to try something different. I have to say, Wingrave was super easy to play. You could even call him free Wingrave. Not only does he have self-sustain through healing, also damage reduction, and if you mess up, if your ultimate's ready, then you can just press that button and you literally can't die for its entire duration. So let's get into a few of his abilities. First up, Righteous Strike, a horizontal slash that provides healing and damage reduction. The only complaint I have about Righteous Strike is it sometimes misses enemies who are flying, but it has a low CD and overall it's great. You then get Radiant Pulse. You form a shield to protect yourself from ranged attacks and sometimes do a bit of damage or provide a bit of healing. Ultimately, this one seems a little bit more niche, especially in solo play, which is the bulk of my experience so far. And then last up, Judgment. Taunt enemies, heal on hit, and potentially reduce their damage output. Judgment feels really good, especially when combined with weapons that have multi-hit combos. And last up, Divine Aegis. Complete invulnerability within the field. Super OP, and it means if you're a bad player, you're not sure you're going to be able to dodge everything, don't worry. You can often set yourself up, stack a little bit of break effect, pop Divine Aegis, break the boss during the Divine Aegis so they can't hit you afterwards, and get in a massive amount of damage. So overall, I would say that Wingrave is by far the strongest character right now. That said, most of the other characters do feel good to play. I really like that he has a good self-sustained kit, great for new players, and also, if you are playing solo, you're able to balance his stats really easily. You're not forced into ability power where you have to wait on cooldowns, you're not forced into weapon stuff where you have to actively hit enemies and don't have too many range options, and he can scale his damage based on his defenses, so stacking defenses doesn't feel so bad if you like doing big damage. Next up is Niss. I've played her as both AP and weapon power, and I generally prefer the AP or ability power version. This is more of a burst DPS oriented thing, and it takes advantage of her massive mobility by shadow stepping through enemies, because that is her first ability, and the core of her kit. Basically, you dash through an enemy, damage them as you do. Just be aware that this can also leave you in the bad circles on the ground. It's not permanent invulnerability or anything like that, but having that mobility means ranged enemies that are typically annoying on many other characters are absolutely no threat to Niss. Next up you have Vengeful Shade. Throw knives for pretty minimal damage from my experience, but it does have a nice melee follow-up attack, and it can be talented to provide a damage reduction. So overall, a Vengeful Shade paired with a Shadow Step feels really good. And last up, Umbral Aura. You dodge to gain a bit of damage bonus. Overall, I think it's kind of weak, and Gloom Shroud is a better way to apply Umbral Aura anyway. That is her ultimate. You spam Shadow Step. My only problem with this is sometimes it's a little bit hard, at least on controller, to lock onto enemies and aim the consecutive Shadow Steps without going out of melee range or just missing someone. I also feel like Gloom Shroud very much incentivizes you to build into ability power. Her playstyle is super fun due to all of her mobility. I've messed a bit with a weapon power version, and while I'm sure it's fine, it just is not for me. And also, if you like being a rogue edgelord that shadow steps behind everyone whispers, "Nothing personal, kid," then Niss is absolutely the perfect character for you. If I was rating things just on how fun the playstyle is and the kit, then Niss would actually be my second favorite. Third up, we have Silo, a ranged/grenade specialist. I have to say, I really bounced off of him. His playstyle just didn't fit with me. Possibly because I was using guns, and overall the guns don't feel great on controller. Possibly just because I feel like his kit is missing something. So, first up you have a Firebomb. This puts a dot on things. You combo this with your Oil Bomb that slows enemies and refreshes Firebomb, which can be used to ignite it on hit. Overall, this is a nice combo, but outside of his combo, I don't feel like Silo brings all that much to the table. He does have a proto-clone, which is a taunt/distraction. Overall, though, keeping enemies off of me never felt like a super big concern, so ultimately maybe this is better in group play. And last up, Arch Nemesis, which, okay, if it charged up a little faster, would be totally a reason to play Silo, because you basically just drop a clone or a little drone thing that fires constant orbital strikes. Unfortunately, two problems here. One, on single target, it charges up really slowly, at least from my experience. And number two, on single target, especially bosses, it doesn't always hit them the most reliably. So while it's super cool and impressive, and I love filling the screen with light shows, it didn't feel like it made a difference nearly as much as some of the other characters' ultimates. Which is all to say, I'm probably judging Silo unfairly here. If you like being a grenadier, you like shooting stuff, I mean, you can use guns on any character, but Silo definitely has the advantage of additional ranged cooldowns and the taunt, which is quite nice in solo play if you're bad at avoiding enemies. But because I didn't mesh with a gun playstyle, even using the Tempest shotgun, which was the one that felt the best because it's a lot harder to miss with a shotgun, I did not play him very much, and I don't feel like I've fully explored his potential. Then you have Kyros, the Void character, which again, if I was just going to judge purely on fun playstyles, I would put Kyros at number 1. His main ability is Savage Rake. It's easy to combo, and it's an AoE slash that does good damage. This is powered by arcane fragments, which are generated by your other abilities. So if you want to slash everything on the screen constantly, go ahead and invest into Savage Rake. Next up, you have Siphon Radiant, an energy wave that gives you fragments to power more Savage Rakes. As you can tell, Kyros' toolkit is all about AoE damage and amplifying it, because his third ability, Arcane Focus, marks enemies, you hit them, or wait 8 seconds to build up an explosion that does, yes, even more AoE damage. And finally, Hand of Reckoning is a huge AoE damage pulse. So, I like fighting groups of enemies. This is an ARPG. Fighting groups of enemies in an ARPG makes sense, and Kyros is your man. Or Void Creature. I don't actually know what Kyros is. Early on, I felt like sustain was a little bit of an issue, but after leveling him up and investing into the healing perk on Savage Rake, that felt pretty comfy as well. Great for doing tons of AoE damage, but if you're building ability power, he is more burst focused, so on bosses there will be some downtime windows where you don't feel like you can do anything that's super impactful. Then we have Senja. Her whole deal is she's a gladiator. She fights in the arena and she lives for the attention from the crowd. So you can hold a lot of her skills to gain a damage reduction, a heal over time, and the crowd's attention, which is a buff. She's another tanky brawler who reminds me a lot of Wingrave. Her gladiator pummel can be used as a quick punch or held to stagger enemies. Meanwhile, her gain favor, you hold it, you get a buff, it deals damage, it taunts nearby enemies, and I found that I surprisingly wasn't taking all that much damage while holding it. I thought, oh, enemies would tear me apart. Nope, the devs have balanced this pretty well. Then you have Lightning Grasp, because why walk up to enemies when you can pull them to you? As a note, without the range extension, it can be a little bit too close range for my taste. And last up, Thunderous Glory. Big buffs on Senja, and having the buff causes her attacks to emit chain lightning, allowing you even more AoE. Now, while Senja does feel really good to play, and from a fantasy perspective, if you want to live that gladiator fantasy, honestly, she does a much better job than most other characters in most other games. Practically speaking, she is kind of Wingrave, but a little bit worse. You can't play as outright aggressive as you'd be able to on Grendel, but you also can't be quite as defensive as you would be on Wingrave. So she lives in this slightly awkward middle ground, where she's good, but maybe not the best at anything specific. Then you have Venomess, who I went into thinking she was an AP stacking poison mage and I'd use all of my fun abilities. And then, after playing her for a while, I realized that stacking attack power and using the abilities for support and sustain felt better, at least to me. First up, Transfusion. Fire a projectile or multiple projectiles that lock onto enemies and heal you on hit. This provides really, really good sustain. But you can make it even better with Vampiric Blast, that absorbs poison clouds from a field of battle and heals you based on this. Use this after something like Venom Thrusters so that you have poison clouds to absorb. Which, speaking of, her movement ability is Venom Thrusters. It leaves behind poison clouds and it applies venom to enemies. I really needed to remember to use this before Vampiric Blast, but half the time I'd hit the buttons in the wrong order. I'm sure if I played the character more, I'd build up that correct muscle memory. Last up, Deep Breath, massive explosion, lots of venom, many dots, handle it. I was really pleasantly surprised at how much sustain Venomess had and how tanky it made her feel. This is another super comfy to play character, and if you want a ranged option, I would highly recommend her. I also like combining her with fast hitting weapons like the dual daggers, focusing on, again, using my abilities for sustain. but then getting out all of those massive damage combos and not really worrying about, oh, if I'm going to stand in the circle to finish my combo, it's fine, I'll just heal up afterwards, is not a big deal. Behind Wingrave, I would say she's the second easiest character to play, but you will have to play for a little bit to unlock her, either through story progression or the tower, which was basically a battle pass when the game was an MMO, and now you just get a bunch of things by leveling up. Then last but certainly not least is Grendel the Berserker. In short, Grendel Smash. First up, he has Tremor, deals high break damage, and it deals damage in a line, so it's great for staggering multiple enemies or firing through a crowd. And of course, you do this because while they're staggered, you want to spin to win with Whirlwind. And yes, this is an ARPG, so of course, it has a Whirlwind skill, and this Whirlwind skill is pretty darn awesome. Because you build charge by using your other abilities, you're able to spin a lot, and it feels like you're dropping out to use something else impactful, rather than just, aw, I ran out of mana, because running out of mana when you want to spin to win, always super sad. Then Mighty Leap rounds out his kit by providing him with a bit of extra mobility. But of course, he is a Berserker, and so he has Berserk Frenzy. More weapon power, more ability power, and it absolutely melts sections off of bosses, especially when combined with a Tremor into fully charged Whirlwind. While I'd say Grendel has a super fun playstyle, and he really does embody that Berserker archetype, I'd also say you have to be super aggressive and good at dodging, because unlike Senja and Wingrave, he lacks sustain and he lacks general defenses. So, if you are good at dodging, getting out of those red circles, you'll do very well on him. But you do have to be very careful of the chip damage, heal up, and make sure you're not tanking too much. Oh, and also maybe grab the sustain talent in your Whirlwind. With all that said, personally, I did have quite a bit of fun playing Grendel. And so those are the 7 Wayfinders that you can play, at least as of right now, with the Echoes and Quality of Life update. You've got melee brawlers like Senja, Wingrave, and Grendel. You have sort of magey characters like Venomess or Kyros. Then you have a super mobile rogue in Niss and a ranged specialist in Silo. But all of that is to say that you can also mix and match any weapons you want. You can give Grendel a sword and shield, which makes him much tankier. You can give Senja a gun, and why not just start shooting enemies? Or you can give Wingrave 2 tiny little dual daggers, which is absolutely hilarious and surprisingly effective. Beyond that, you can invest your echoes into a variety of stats. For example, health, physical defense, and magic defense will generally make you tankier, while resilience will prevent enemies from staggering and interrupting you, though some characters have a talent that just makes them immune to that anyway. You can invest in weapon power to do more damage with your melee hits, ability power to do more damage with your skills, or break power to break enemies more effectively, preventing them from acting for a short duration. And if you want bigger numbers, well, maybe grab some crit and crit power. Then when you combine this with enhancing character abilities up to 3 levels per ability, you get about 7 points to play with by level 30. There's plenty of builds, plenty of customization to play how you like. It just so happens that some characters are going to be better at certain things than others, i.e., Grendel is never going to have as many defenses or as much sustain as Wingrave. That's simply not his job. He does spin to win. So personally, I really like the balance that Airship Syndicate has hit when it comes to Wayfinder, and also the fact that we've really embraced these class fantasies. If you want to see my thoughts on the game as a whole, some of my first impressions, then check that video out after this. And aside of that, I'm curious which of the characters or the fantasies most appeal to you. Let me know down below if you've played the game, what you like, or if you haven't played the game yet, what you think is the most interesting. Now before I go, I'd like to take a minute to thank my patrons and channel members for the continued support. For as little as $1 a month, you can help make videos just like this one possible. Link to support is down below, and you can help ensure there's more videos like this, even if they aren't super popular in the YouTube algorithm. Of course, a big thanks to everyone who watched to the end of the video. I'm glad you enjoyed seeing my thoughts on some of the Wayfinders you can play in Wayfinder, and I kinda hope they add a couple more characters because they've done such a good job with the different kits presented so far. But if that happens, that'll be a topic for another video. So again, I'm glad you enjoyed, and I hope to see you in the next one.